For those who are just joining us, my name is Jaime Stief. I work with the Tamarack Institute. You're here for a webinar on cybersecurity, building a proactive approach, which is a partnership with the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, Technology Helps, and the CyberPeace Institute. As we get started, we wanted to start with a moment of gratitude and commitment. I'm joining from the traditional territories of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Waterloo, Ontario. We're grateful for everybody who's joining us across Turtle Island and beyond. And we encourage you to let us know where you're joining us from. And if you know what territories you're joining from, that would be awesome. Let us know in the chat. When we think about communities across Turtle Island and Indigenous communities, one element worth considering is the digital divide, or how low internet bandwidth has a great impact on people's ability to access information and conversations in rural and remote parts of Canada. In a similar way, access to knowledge about an issue like cybersecurity might be less available in these areas, which can also have implications for accessing services and the inclusion of Indigenous voices. Our hope is that today's conversation can make an issue like cybersecurity, which has implications for organizations large and small, for profit and nonprofit, more accessible, and to keep all of our digital systems up and running and serving the communities that rely on them most. For those who aren't familiar with Tamarack, our mission is to be a connected force for community change, building the capacity of change makers in cities and communities within Canada and around the world. Our 2030 strategic priorities are to grow the capacity of change makers, shift policy and advocate for systems change, and drive large-scale change. Our webinar partners today are the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, Technology Helps, and the CyberPeace Institute. And our speakers today are Jason Shim from CCNDR, Charles Buchanan from Technology Helps, and Fabien Leimgruber from the CyberPeace Institute. And with that, I am going to hand the microphone over to Jason to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. So my name is Jason Shim, and I'm a member of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience team, or CINDR for short. And we've been working hard to understand how access to technology is impacting the nonprofit sector in Canada. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Charles and Fabien today. And you can also access the biographies on the webinar resource page, and we'll have a chance to introduce ourselves in more detail in our respective presentations. So for our time together today, Charles, Fabien, and I will be sharing our perspectives about cybersecurity and how to build a proactive approach. And each of us will spend about 10 minutes describing our work and our perspectives on and about cybersecurity. All right, so we'll kick it off here. I'm going to provide a brief cybersecurity overview, and from there we'll move on to the other presenters as well, followed by a Q&A. So yes, my name is Jason Chin, and I serve as Chief Digital Officer for the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, or CINDR. And CINDR is for a digitally enabled nonprofit sector where Canada's nonprofits use data and tech to multiply their mission and multiply their impact. And within CINDR, I'm also working with a group on a cybersecurity on-ramp to identify prototypes to reduce the overwhelm that organizations may feel with regards to addressing cybersecurity within their organizations. And so I'd like to begin with sharing a story about going on vacation. So several years ago, when going on vacation, I had posted on social media that I was at the airport and about to take off on an international flight. And the flight was fairly uneventful. However, when I landed, I was greeted with texts and as well as emails from someone at an organization that I was involved with that requests had come through requesting the transfer of funds. Now, what had occurred was that a malicious actor had taken the opportunity to identify that I would be unreachable for nearly half a day to send emails using a fake email address purporting to be me with urgent requests to transfer the funds. Now, thankfully, there were procedures and controls in place around identity verification and finance, which thwarted this attempted attack. But this is just one story out of many that people experience, and perhaps you may have heard other stories where variations of this may involve gift cards or other types of requests. And so I share this story to illustrate that cybersecurity impacts everyone and at all levels of organizations. And so cybersecurity describes protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information in terms of going with a working definition. Now, nearly everything in modern day-to-day life, and indeed in the work that we do, is over a network, and we use devices for nearly everything. So cybersecurity is pretty all-encompassing. And because cybersecurity does impact nearly everything, I want to share with you some of the numbers. Now, a group of researchers published a paper in the IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy, in which they had set up a honey site, or a website that looks like a legitimate website, and logged attempts by malicious bots. And they found that it recorded about 37,000 requests each month. Now, that's every month. And this is far beyond just humans attempting, to do things manually. It's that many of these attacks and attempts are also automated. In addition, a report published by N10 reveals that 68% of nonprofits do not have documented policies and procedures in place should a cyber attack occur. Now, this is concerning because it's like having a disaster recovery plan. So you may already have a disaster recovery plan for your organization that may account for things like fire or flood, or natural disasters. And so it can be really important and helpful to also have the recovery plan with regards to cyber attacks. Now, in terms of common attacks that folks may experience, you're just going to touch upon, them very briefly, and they may involve phishing attacks, which are the kind of attacks that come via emails that are asking for to click through on a website and to enter credentials, but it's actually a fake website. Things like malware attacks. One vector that I've observed is websites that purport to be software or webinar software, but are not the official websites. And so tricking people into installing malware onto their websites. And this may subsequently lead to ransomware being installed on machines and impacting a network. Credential stuffing is another, in which breached websites have their password databases leaked, and those same passwords are then repurposed and reused for other websites or credentials to access sensitive information. And so the risks to nonprofits are varied, and they range from the reputational risk to your organization, as well as loss of trust among your supporters and donors, but also the financial risks, and they may come in the form of direct costs involved for remediation, as well as organizational downtime, but also the indirect costs that may be expressed in the opportunity cost, in that this takes time away from focusing on the core of your organizational mission as well. And so I want to take a moment to address some of the myths that may be present around cybersecurity. So the first is that organizations may sometimes perceive that because they aren't doing famous or controversial work, no one would attack the organization. Now, cyber attacks are often ones of opportunity, and when dealing with automated attacks, it's all about the numbers. So even if there's a small chance of compromise that a ransom could be paid out, it is sufficient to warrant mass attacks on the behalf of attackers there. So organizations of all sizes can be impacted by cyber attacks. So just because you aren't doing famous or controversial work, doesn't mean that you're immune to cyber attacks. Another myth is that cyber insurance is only for large organizations. Cyber insurance can help cover your organization if you're impacted by a cyber attack. And indeed, the requirements to get cyber insurance often also require basic training for staff to confirm that that has been completed. And so that can also help mitigate the risk in that regard for organizations. And lastly, the myth that I may not have the budget for it. Totally understand that budgets can certainly be tight, but I also like to use the analogy of a bicycle that if you have a bicycle, you likely do not want to leave it unlocked for too long, as it's an additional risk and is far more expensive to deal with the aftermath afterwards. So it's really something that needs to be accounted for as part of organizational planning as well. Now, in terms of frameworks, I could probably spend a ton more time on it as anyone on this call may. But I just want to share, in terms of frameworks for understanding cybersecurity, here's one from the National Institute for Science and Technology. That this may be far beyond the scope of many organizations, but what's important to take away from this is that the broad principles around it, around identifying risks to an organization around cybersecurity, protecting an organization, detecting threats, responding threats, recovering from attacks if they occur, having the plans in place. This is helpful to broadly organize some of the principles around how one may approach cybersecurity as well. Now, in a Canadian context, we have a standard developed by the Digital Governance Council that is intended directly for small to medium organizations, and it outlines some of the basic controls that may be useful for organizations. And so if you search online for CAN CIOSC 104, that it will outline baseline cybersecurity controls that have been developed specifically for the Canadian context and small to medium organizations. So as you look ahead to identify, what are the specific standards that you can look to. This is one example here. And so the vision for the sector, Cinder had released a report last year around building the cybersecurity and resilience of Canada's nonprofit sector. And the vision is that every Canadian nonprofit is empowered to securely meet its mission and protect the organization and its beneficiaries from cyber threats. And so if you're interested in following the work, please feel free to visit the Cinder website and also subscribe. And if there's one ask that I would like to make of folks, I know that many folks identify that two-factor authentication is, or multi-factor authentication is turned on for their organizations, is that to really reinforce this is that if you haven't already turned it on, please do, not just for your organization, but for your personal accounts as well, is that this can help mitigate significant risks of account compromise for you. And with that, I will pass it over to Charles.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, for taking the time to talk about this really important topic. It's so I will start the introduction. Yeah, Charles Buchanan. I'm the founder and CEO of Technology Helps, and I started this organization just shy of 8 years ago. And Technology Helps exists for the purpose of keeping the social sector, nonprofit organizations, charities, co-ops safe and secure. So that's what we do. We only work with social purpose organizations focused entirely on using technology to be better organizations. So our mission is the eradication of technology poverty, which is in the nonprofit sector primarily, and also in community. So when it comes to cybersecurity, it's I just want to echo something that Jason mentioned a few minutes ago, which is multi-factor authentication. It is inconvenient for people. Used to find it quite inconvenient that, well, we should not have to do this, but for people but it's such a critical thing to have in your organization. The simplest thing that you can do to protect yourself. So let's talk about cybersecurity. Jason's indicated, we know what the threats are. And I'll just go back a little bit of the origin story of what we do for cybersecurity and where we got to. Just about 8 years ago, 2016, I think it was, I was in a conversation like this, and it was, fairly large room, pretty much the same. And we're talking about cybersecurity. But back then, we were talking about whether the threat is real or not. So the conversation was, is the threat real? Is cybersecurity should cybersecurity be a concern for nonprofit organizations? And people were like, yes, we talked about the threats, we talked about the bad actors, we talked about the possible ways of being breached and the implications and the impacts, and everybody walked away feeling, generally aware and generally concerned. The next year, we sat down, where a similar conversation was occurring. Half the people in the room were the same. So I asked them, so what is it that has changed from last year till now? And they said, well, last year we heard about things and we were concerned. This year, based on what we're seeing, we're now very concerned. So then it's like, well, what have you done what have you done about it? And pretty much reflects the same challenges that we're seeing in the poll that Jason raised earlier, that people, not knowing where to start, not having the financial resources, but at least now we're not seeing too many people who are saying that leadership, senior management, board members are not in line with this. So what I took away from that conversation, based on what Technology Helps does, like we provide system solutions to systemic problems. And the cybersecurity situation is, at the time, we saw it more as a systemic problem. It still is, but now I know people are probably sick of the word. It's almost on the level of being a global pandemic. So it is a big problem. So we sat down and said, okay, what can we do to help organizations provide protect themselves in a way that is comprehensive and covers all the bases? And so I pulled a bunch of very smart security people in the room. My prior job before I started this, I was in senior technology leadership at Suncor and other places in the for-profit sector, and security was one of my areas. So I brought in security experts, and we sat in a room and said, how can we find something that will cover everything and keep organizations safe? And the result of that was an evolutionary system that's now pretty much not perfect, but pretty much there, that we call EverSecure, which is the program that Technology Helps offers for the nonprofit sector. And at this point, we have close to 100 organizations coast to coast that are keeping themselves very safe. But what I do want to leave you with today, and that's why there are no slides and we're not promoting or selling anything, is the approach that is, what does it mean to be secure? And how can you protect yourself? So there are a few key questions that I'd like that, when you think about, am I doing enough? Am I safe? Is my organization safe? The question you would ask yourself first and foremost, cybersecurity is not difficult, right? Cybersecurity is you're really concerned about one thing. You are concerned about your enterprise information, the information in your organization. And it's your important information that you're primarily concerned about. And there are only so many things that could happen to your information. One, it could fall into the wrong hands. Two, it could become untrusted. Or three, it could become unavailable. That's what you're trying to prevent at the end of the day. Stop your important information from falling in the wrong hands. So with our approach to cybersecurity and the things I would want people to consider is, first and foremost, you need to know, what do I know what my important information is? What is my important information? And it could be, is it my donor information, my client information, my stakeholder information, my financials, whatever? What is your important information? And do I know who has access to it? Do I know where it's do I know who's got access to that information, and who is, and the chain of custody, or what's happening to it? So do I know what that information is and where it is, and what am I doing to protect it? Do I know what could happen to it? Do I have, what could happen to that information? It's like, yeah, so what are the risks? Do I have a risk register? Do I know that, okay, so, and if something were to happen to that information, what's the implication to the organization? What could happen? What's the likelihood, and what's the impact of that information falling into the wrong hands, or becoming untrusted, or becoming unavailable? And then, would I know if something like that occurred? Do I have mechanisms in place that would help me identify where things have been touched? Do I have monitoring of my systems? Do I know who's doing what? Beyond that, how prepared are my people to deal with these things? So the biggest risk, the biggest cyber risk to any organization is not nefarious actors kicking the doors down. It's people within the organization behaving in a way that's not protective of the organization. And that we're talking simple things like, yes, turn on multifactor authentication. Do not sign into public Wi-Fi. Do not click on links you do not know. Take a second to verify that an email that comes from, and what seems like an important email to change banking information is actually coming from the right source. So how trained are people? Have they been, do you test their skills every once in a while through a phishing exercise? And when something does occur, what do you do about it? Do you have a response plan that shows who needs to be called? Do you need to contact the privacy commissioner? Do you need to contact the bank? Do you need to shut off the systems here and there? And how up to date is your full response plan? And then in addition to that, do you have policies in place that guide the behaviors within the organization to say, well, we know this is what safe means to us, and everyone needs to behave in this way? And do you have people, and when people sign off on policies, they actually, it's a constant reminder that they need to behave in a certain way, and security is top of mind for the organization. And then wrapping all that around, can you prove that you're doing all these things to your senior leaders? Do you have a cybersecurity dashboard that shows your risks, it shows your behaviors, it shows the risk that you've accepted, the risk that you've chosen, you've mitigated, the risk that you've insured against? Do you have all that you could say in the event of something happening that we have done our best? Because it's not a case of whether you are going to be breached. You're probably currently are being breached. The average breach, they were in the system for somewhere like anywhere from 6 weeks or so before they make an appearance. So they scope your systems, they see if there's anything of note, they see where the vulnerabilities are, where the soft spots are. And if there's nothing interesting, they'll move on. Or sometimes they might just be a nuisance and just lock up a few systems, charge a few, get a few $1,000s and move on, and then sell your name on the sucker exchange so that somebody else will be doing the same thing very soon. So that's pretty much so when you look at all the things that you need to do, know what you've got, know what could happen to it, know what you do if something were to happen, have your monitoring in place, have your people trained, and have your policies and up to date, and have people tested constantly. And when you put all that together, that's the essence of, that's all that that's what we offer on the EverSecure program. And it's available to organizations for a nominal annual fee. And we do it pretty much for you. So there are no risks around not knowing what to do, and that the environment keeps changing, and you're never going to be able to keep up. So I'll just pause there and just hand it over back to, I think it's Fabien.
Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate your presentation. I think it really reflects what you said about 2FA. So I'm super happy to be there. Thanks for the invitation. I'm a bit far. I'm from Switzerland, Geneva, close to Geneva. So super happy to be there with you. I have background mainly in cybersecurity, working for the Swiss government, private sector. More recently for the International Committee of the Red Cross, where I was in charge of the cyber awareness program for all the staff around the world. So the 2FA guys, I follow you on that part. That's a critical asset and always a bit difficult to put in place. But when it's there, it's super nice. And for almost 4 years now, I'm working at the CyberPeace Institute. We are a non-profit organization in Geneva, Switzerland, with the aim to reduce the harm of cyber attack on vulnerable communities. So my team mainly work with non-profit organization, NGO association. I'm senior program manager at the Institute. We end up in the category of the medium size NGO, 30 staff, mainly in Europe. I have a colleague in Kenya, in Africa, just hiring someone in North America right now. Also pretty young, 2019, for the creation of the Institute. So trying to tackle a bit these challenges we face in the cybersecurity world. What I will do in my presentation, I have two parts. I want to debrief a bit with you on different threats and risk and some statistics that we see happening with the NGO we are working on. And on the second part, I would like to show you the solution we developed at the Institute to help NGOs around the world. So on the next slide, you can see that, in fact, cyber attacks, they happen everywhere. As Charles just said, maybe you already breached. Some people don't know that. Jason said it at the beginning, one of the main risks is reputational and financial aspect. So you can see here on the screen different cases of cyber attack. The threat of the CU fraud was typical of financial threat. So there was an NGO called Root of Peace working in Afghanistan. They got hit by a CEO scam attack. So you know, it's the famous fake call. You had almost the holiday story of Jason, and they lost more than $1 million US. So that was almost all the operational budget they had on the ground for Afghanistan due to a cyber attack. Database exposed. What about the reputation? When you work in a non-profit world, you need the trust of your partner. You need the trust of your beneficiaries. That's how you can engage. That's how you can deliver services on the ground. That's how you help people. If you lose the trust due to a cyber incident, that's quite challenging. So all these different aspects need to be tackled when you talk about cybersecurity. On the other side, you have threat actor. And as you can see on the next slide, they believe non-profit organizations are quite an interesting target. They have money. It seems there is low risk to target a non-profit organization because they don't have the right measure in place. They don't have logs to review. They have difficulties to investigate a cyber attack, trying to understand who was behind. So it seems at the end they are quite an easy prey. Because as you said in the first survey, so non-profit world lack of human resources and lack of money today to really be on top on the cybersecurity field. Even if Jason told you money is something it will be interesting to invest at the beginning and not after, I can only follow on that. At the same time, and you probably are experiencing that in your own life, everything becomes digital. We make the digital transformation on everything. You have staff on the ground, they go out, most of the time they have an iPad, they have tablets, something to collect data on the ground. So everything is happening, everything is moving very fast. So we said, okay, we need to understand a bit better what's happening on the ground with this NGO. So we work with more than 200 NGOs today, and we had a research that was conducted last year, just focusing a bit on the Geneva area. So you can see some statistics here about what's happening in Geneva, and in fact, it's a bit what's happening everywhere in the world. So we had the same analysis from other parts of the world. So 41% of the NGO were a victim of a cyber attack, a non-victim of a cyber attack. So that's also a super important point. A lot of them don't necessarily know they are targeted by an attack. Data breach, this 65% of data breach. We also had that in Jason's presentation, you know, this famous credential leak. If you are using everywhere the same login and password, there is a data breach, people can reuse that to connect to other services, to cloud services. Maybe you are using Google Drive only with a login and password. What if threat actor can access your own infrastructure and gather and take off information you have stored there? So that's typically challenges that you face. In terms of threat of cyber attack, concrete cyber attack, you can see phishing, ransomware, and DDoS are the most common cyber threat faced by NGOs. So you can go ahead, him on the next slide. Thank you so much. On the other side, that's the perception. That's the perception of the threat. So social engineering. So you know, NGOs, non-profit world, they work with people. So of course, the first threat they face on the other side is that people are trying to trick them. And that's what we call social engineering. Social engineering is the fact to try hacking the human brain instead of hacking the technology. That's the first threat perception. Ransomware. Why? Because ransomware, you have that everywhere in the news. You have so many now governments, local authorities, private company, non-profit organization that got hit by a ransomware and they need to pay a ransom, otherwise the sensitive information are disclosed. So that's really a big challenge. But what happened, you can see that on the other slide, is that even if the human aspect is a key element for the NGO, they are not investing protection about the staff. 55% of them don't train regularly the staff on the cybersecurity awareness, phishing campaign, the basic two-factor authentication, how to detect a phishing email, etc. So Charles said that cybersecurity looks easy. It's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. He said, you need to understand where are your important information, what are the critical functions you have in your organization. Then you have to understand who can pose a threat to you. Are you targeted by threat actors that are states? Are you targeted by criminal groups that are only looking into your money? You have to understand a bit this ecosystem. But it's quite difficult. You said at the pool at the beginning that 58% of you don't have the human resource and the financial mean to do all this job in terms of cybersecurity. And that's also what we experience at the CyberPeace Institute. So we said we need to come with a solution, a free solution to empower nonprofit organizations around the world. And that's what we called the CyberPeace Builders. You can see on the next slide, that's a program that we started saying that money, nonprofit organizations don't necessarily have it for cybersecurity. So let's try to deliver them free services. Human resources, they don't have that. So we have to find the human experts to work with the NGO. Where are currently cybersecurity human experts? They are in the private sector, most of them. So what we do is that we do partnership with private companies around the world to engage their cybersecurity experts in volunteering engagement to help nonprofit organizations around the world. And what do we do with this NGO? So we have two main activities that you can see on the next slide. So one part is consulting services, helping you to do this security policy, how to implement security policy, draft them. What about the security of your website, doing vulnerability scan? Training, we talk a lot of training. The volunteer can also train your organization on the basic of cybersecurity awareness. The second part is support to incident response. Looking into the dark web, so we have partners that provide us with tools that the volunteer can use to go into the dark web, look for credential leak information about nonprofit organization, and then inform them. We also have technical partners that deliver technical information about information of NGO. Is your NGO breached? Is there an issue on the website? Is there a malware on one of your IT systems? So that kind of alerts that we can get and push it back to the nonprofit organization. How we do that? Through collaboration. So on the next slide, you have just basic of the collaboration. So when we have a nonprofit organization that join the CyberPeace Builder program, everything for free, they have a cybersecurity assessment. Out of that, we will help to define more than 30 different engagements. These engagements are missions. And these missions are pushed into a portal for the volunteers to be taken. So the volunteer will directly work with the nonprofit organization to help them tackle one of the different aspects of the cybersecurity challenges. So the program is quite new, a bit more than 3 years now operating, but as you can see on the other side, there is interest. There is the need to provide free cybersecurity services to NGOs around the world. So 210, I think today, NGOs are part of the program with 600 volunteers. But my message here is that it's really open to any nonprofit organization around the world. So if you're interested to join for free to get this kind of services, having a volunteers that help you to set up two-factor authentication, having a volunteers that drive you through a cybersecurity awareness training for your staff, that help you to review the cybersecurity of your website, that help you to set up an incident response plan. I mean, they are available for you. So don't hesitate, please feel free to register. Of course, if you have any question, you will find information online. I'm here, but I really encourage you to use that as a starter point into the cybersecurity world. And then once you kick off, you can go further, you can go with commercial professional, you can go for commercial services. But let's start with what is available for you right now. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate.
Thank you, Fabien. And yeah, really enjoyed all the presentations, and to go back to some of the points. I think both Charles and Fabien touched upon the very human element of cybersecurity. And Fabien, I quite enjoyed your analogy there, where hacking the human brain rather than hacking a system. It's very, very apt. So from here, well, it's time to jump into Q&A. And so Jaime will be hosting the Q&A parts, and I'll throw it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who added questions to the Q&A box, and you can still do that. The first question is from an anonymous participant, who asks, what is the best malware and antivirus should I download, or that I could download on our work computers? Is there any other protective software, I guess, that they should be keeping in mind? Is there anyone who might want to weigh in on that?
I'm happy to. So it's always difficult, you know, to promote commercial solutions. So you can find online a lot of information. I think there is one key element that I would like to flag about antivirus, anti-malware is that, first of all, for the people that are using a Mac, you also need an antivirus on your Mac. So that was a common belief, at least on my side. I don't know if you had the same in the past, that, oh, you have a Mac, you're safe. It's not the case anymore. Same for mobile phone. If you are using Android phone, you are more than welcome to have an antivirus on your Android phones, because you have a lot of application that can infect your systems. You have free antivirus that exist. The basic solution are always, they made the job. Usually when you pay for extra services on an antivirus, it's because you have extra services like VPN, password managers, this kind of stuff. But what is key, if you're working in an organization, is to have a solution that you're able to monitor, that is deployed, up to date, and active on all your endpoint, on all your IT systems. That's really the key. And then go for any commercial solution that you heard from your friends, that you have background from other NGOs that are using it. It will be a good choice. Charles, maybe you have some extra insight.
Yeah, so yeah, the only thing I would suggest is, like, I'm not going to suggest any specific solution, but be very careful about what you download you could really harm yourself by downloading a virus, thinking that you're downloading antivirus software. So one, and the next thing is, it's critical that it be updated. So it's never, it's better to have something that's constantly monitored and being updated constantly, because the landscape is changing. So you download something today, there are threats there. So it's more to go with a monitoring solution than just to go with antivirus. Like, you will need the endpoint protection, but it has to be backed at the source by a very reputable, hardworking company.
Oh yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is, you know, the best one can be the one that you may have on hand. Like, if you have a choice between like not having it and like having it, I would say that keeping in mind for those who are using Windows or using Windows 11, that it actually comes bundled with antivirus as well. So if you're looking at, you know, something that folks that you may already have it there, and it may be a matter of having that turned on as a basic protection there.
That's great. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, rather than a set it and forget it approach, it's like whatever you choose, make sure that you're monitoring it, you're using it consistently, you're updating it frequently. The advice on making sure that you have a plan for your Mac or your Apple products, and also your Android phone, those are all well taken points. The next question I was going to put out for you three is, should multi-factor authentication be done on a single device, aka computers, or separate devices, computers and phones? So I think it's asking, I'm assuming on a computer, it's the second factor authentication would be maybe your email address. And so I think they're asking, is it better to have it through an email address or through a phone?
I'll jump in initially. So when looking at the potential threats, again, like having MFA on versus not at all is, you know, one step. However, when you're looking at the various methods of MFA, if you're having it sent via a text message to your phone or being sent via email, you have to kind of look at you know, the possibility that whoever is attacking you may have access to your email as well, or they may have you know, compromised, you know, your cell phone number or your SIM card. And so you know, if you have an authentication app on your phone, you know, that would mean that an attacker would have had to get access to your password as well as your physical phone itself. And so there's if you have an authentication app on a phone, then that would make it a bit more difficult with regards to an MFA approach.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, it's So yeah, because if often your email has, if you have been compromised, your email would be compromised. So they would have access to your email. So they would just send a verification to themselves and say, yes, we're authorized. However, like and depends on how, I mean, it's not as inconvenient as people think. Like, yes, I have to unlock I have multifactor authentication in one process system that goes to my phone that has to be unlocked with facial ID. So someone would have to physically have access to my phone in addition to have breached my system in order to be verified.
The only thing I would add to this, so I'm hearing the advice that having that second authentication through a phone is potentially harder to hack than through an email address. The only caution I would add there is for those doing multi-factor authentication through or when they live in rural and remote parts of wherever, that if you don't have cell service, I say this because I've had that happen where the MFA sent me a text that I could not receive and I couldn't get into my accounts. So just something to consider if you're joining from a rural part of Canada or abroad. Okay, so looking at our next question, I'm seeing someone has asked, I'm curious about the safety around cloud storage and specifically Google Drive. We store minimal client information, and I'm trying to find best practices for our directors who want everything stored as printed copies. So it sounds like getting people to embrace cloud storage. Are there any concerns about cloud storage in general, whether it's Google or another option?
That's a super interesting one. I think you really have to differentiate two things. So one thing is cybersecurity of cloud storage, and the second point is privacy of cloud storage. So a lot of people try to mix a bit the both. So the privacy is really about the data protection rules. So do you feel confident to put all your information at Google, at Microsoft? So that's a decision you have to take on your own organization. And then you have the security point of view. So when you apply cybersecurity principle to cloud storage access, for example, Google or Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox even, I mean, they are pretty safe. If you have a robust password that is not compromised, if you have two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication to access your account, if you ensure that you have access right and that not anyone in the organization can access all the folder that may store sensitive confidential information, I mean, it's okay. At the end, I know I saw a lot of NGOs, they love to have the email server, the cloud storage in the office. You can touch the computer. It's reassuring. It's there. We always say it. I mean, cloud is just somewhere else computer. So it's just a matter of that. So I would stick on that. So if you have the right cybersecurity in place, you have the best practices in cybersecurity in place to protect the access to cloud storage, it's not more risky than any other solution.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
I think you covered most of it. And I think the point I would just like to emphasize is when Fabien refers to good cybersecurity practices, that means no sharing of passwords. And so yes, it's in Google, but here's the Google password. And then managing that chain of custody, or managing the access to those sources. So if someone leaves the group, a board member leaves the organization, that access gets cut off. So somebody has to be managing the access to it. But they're generally safe, and probably safer than papers in the office that someone could just pick up a copy and walk out with. But that's where I would put most of my energy into access control.
That's great. Yep, Jason, go ahead.
And the only thing I would add to that as well is ensuring that organizations are aware of the backup procedures or backup plan for their cloud storage. Often there's an assumption that by virtue of being in the cloud, like, yes, it may be backed up at their respective cloud storage. However, if something were to happen, to that organization as well, like, do you have a plan for how you're going to restore your files should they disappear from that cloud storage? So that's something to be aware of as well, having a recovery plan in that regard for backups.
Thank you. That's really great. So yeah, in the questions, we had people asking about Google Drive versus LastPass versus SharePoint. And what we're hearing is whatever you choose, make sure that you've got multi-factor authentication set up, make sure you're cognizant of password sharing and ideally discouraging it. And yeah, as Jason said, that you've got a plan for backup if for some reason something were to disappear from the cloud. I'm going to ask one last question before we wrap up. And that is something that I didn't really hear during the webinar, which was cyber insurance. Somebody, Sheila Harrison, is asking if it's worth the expense. Is this something any of you are familiar with or care to weigh in on?
Yes, I am very, very familiar with cyber insurance. And like we work very closely with insurance companies, all the organizations we support, they do get their cyber insurance questionnaire every year. One has to say, like the way to think about cyber insurance is the way you think about household insurance. We have, I think almost anyone, even apartments now for rentals, you need to have insurance. It's a last resort. It's to basically soften the blow after something disastrous has occurred. Insurance is by no means preventative. It's restorative after the fact. So having insurance means that, yes, you will be there. Yeah, the fact that my house is insured doesn't mean I do not lock my doors and I do not check my fire suppression. I don't do anything that's safe. So it's necessary, and I think most organizations are pretty much demanding it because, yes, it's not if you will be breached, it's when you get breached. It is one of the things that will help. And insurance companies they're not in the business of paying out on claims for organizations that have not done enough to protect themselves. So even applying for cyber insurance, you will be asked by your insurance company, do you have MFA in place? Do you have a cybersecurity plan? Do you have your people trained? Do you have all these things in place? And the average organization that has not implemented these things is bordering on becoming uninsurable going forward. Or if they do get insured, their premiums are going to be super high and their deductibles are going to be high, and they will have very difficult time making a successful claim when something does occur.
That sounds really great. Thanks for that, Charles. Jason, I'm looking at you and the final poll that we wanted to launch today. I was going to open it up if you want to introduce it to folks.
Yeah, so the final poll that we have for folks is what is the minimum viable requirements that are essential for organizations to adopt effective cybersecurity practices? So looking to get everyone who's in attendance today their thoughts on it. Choose your top 3. So we have options of development and adoption of cybersecurity protocols, regular training for staff across the organization, cybersecurity assurance, and access to timely resources and supports, and other. So we'll just give it a few moments here for everyone to respond. All right, so the coming in top 2 for sure are development and adoption of cybersecurity protocols and regular training for staff across the organization. So all very important points for sure, and good to see that those are the top identified ones.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation and really highlighting how the specific tools you're using provide, commercial solutions or not, the specific tools that you're using are not as important as training staff of keeping an attentive eye on cybersecurity. And again, this is not a set it and forget it sort of scenario. I'm going to share in the chat some of the resources that were on the landing page for today's webinar, in case you wanted to follow up and read a little bit more deeply. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and we encourage you to check out the Tamarack website for other upcoming webinars from the Tamarack Institute. Thank you again, Charles, Jason, and Fabien, and we're looking forward to seeing you all again on the line soon. Thanks, everyone.